you would introduce yourself and tell us your party affiliation and the contours of your district geographically, a little bit about your biographical background and why you're seeking re-election. That would be great.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to do this. I'm sad my opponent isn't here. He actually is a nice guy with some decent ideas. My name is Dacia Graber. I am the state representative currently for House District 28, running for my third term. And this district was redrawn, as they all were, and it now encompasses the bulk of Southwest Portland. About a third of it is unincorporated Washington County. So it essentially runs down to the Portland waterfront. The George Hines Park, where the Blues Festival happens, that is just in district, but it doesn't really go into the core of downtown. It does encompass PSU, OHSU, all the way out. Highway 26 is the boundary, and then it goes into like the Raleigh Hills area of what I like to call East Beaverton. The mayor of Beaverton does not like that. So we have East Beaverton, and then also sort of that core of Multnomah Village and that area. So the Garden Home area, and I live in that area.
Great. Tell us about where did you grow up? What do you do for a living?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am currently going into my, this always pains me to say this, but 24th year as a firefighter and paramedic. Let's see, 17 of those now professionally. And I'm a mom of 4 kids. The baby just actually took off to OSU, so I'm a recent empty nester. And so I grew up in New York State and moved out to the West Coast when I was 18, and with the exception of a brief stint back in New York City, have never left. So I've always lived either in Washington or Oregon. And I know it's a big thing to say, I'm an X-generation Oregonian. I think it's equally powerful to say this is the place I love and this is my chosen home.
Okay. Why do you want to come back for your third term?
Because I'm a glutton for punishment. No, I actually, I've joked before that my toxic trait is I love being a state legislator. I think the job I do professionally as a firefighter and paramedic gives me an opportunity to see kind of into the areas of our community that a lot of people don't get to go, and that tends to be where people are hurting with issues with access to healthcare, addiction, behavioral health, recovery, the whole spectrum, and really folks that are struggling to make it, in addition to, we see everyone on the economic spectrum. My experience as a mom, raising 4 kids in Portland, has really influenced my decision to be in there and make sure that their kids have the same opportunity that mine have had. And I feel very passionately that working class voices are underrepresented in the legislature. There's no one else that shares my unique vision of what I do in my day-to-day world that translates to that. And I think there's value in that experience, whether you're a teacher, a firefighter, a nurse, someone along those lines. So I am back. I think it's a pretty wonderful thing to be affecting policy on the state level. I think even in 2 terms actually, that I've seen some of the work I've done immediately translate to gains for my community, to see it affect people's lives, and that's really, that's good medicine. That's powerful stuff.
Okay. Tell us about a bill or a couple of bills that you either chief sponsored or worked heavily on that you really want people to know about from your most recent session.
I think the one I'm actually most proud of in the most recent session is the one people have heard the least about, and that's House Bill 4081. That was the EMS modernization bill. And that's where we're taking a very 50,000-foot view of how emergency medical systems operate in the state of Oregon. And currently, while the people doing the work are excellent and they do a great job, the system that governs it, the system that it's organized, was not. And for 40 years, they were trying to make this bill happen, different groups. And what I finally did was pulled kind of a massive table together, an informal table. We had over 120 individual interviews with over 65, I think it was 65 or 66 different stakeholders, to find out what those common values were and get people in a room and say, this is where we need to go with this. So we were able to pass that nearly unanimously in the House and Senate with some surprising support, actually, and get people that normally had been at each other's throats, if you will, maybe not a great term medically, to the table to have these conversations. And so that sets up basically a statewide umbrella under the EMS Council. And what it does is it adopts what we have are the ATABs, the Area Trauma Advisory Boards. It adopts that model of regionalization for EMS. So as we move forward, and we roll this out, and that's going to take standing up some positions in OHA, and we're working on that right now. They have some of that already in process. You're going to have a statewide coordination for EMS response that makes sure that you are getting the right patient to the right hospital or right facility at the right time. Seems like it's something we should have been doing, but there was a lot of individual kingdoms in this, and I'm really proud of the folks that put the work in to make it happen.
So can you give us a hypothetical or a real example of what you mean by that? Are people currently, have they been sent to the wrong hospitals too slowly, or what will be better?
I think, we have a piecemeal approach to things, and this kind of breaks that out into that regionalization under the umbrella. So say, for example, you live in rural Eastern Oregon and you have a heart attack. There are hospitals that you want to go to that have a cath lab on standby, something that they can ramp up really quick, and hospitals that don't. Under the old model, you may be held to, where the private ambulance company transports because of agreements. This is looking at which is the best place. It may mean that you go further to a hospital. It may mean that you go in a different way, whether that's helicopter, but that we get the right patient to the right place, that they get the most efficient level of care that's right for them. We do this really well already in trauma. We have trauma hospitals. We have level 1, which are both here in Portland, and then your level 2 are your cath labs, your stroke labs, things like that, your stroke capabilities. So we really just looked at that model of what do we do well, and how can we apply that on kind of a broader scale.
So there are obviously some winners and losers in a bill like that. Well, if just to use your example, so if I had a heart attack in Eastern Oregon and I used to go to X, but now I go to Y because Y's got the right kind of treatment, X is a loser in that because they're going to get less utilization, less business. Not
necessarily. So it's the acuity level. So if you have someone, and the heart attack's kind of a golden example. That's new under this. Trauma, under the old version, it wouldn't really make a difference. So if you had a trauma patient, there's only one place that's going to give them the right care at the right time. And we know that to be true for things like STEMIs, which are acute heart attacks and stroke, sepsis, acute sepsis. What that does is it frees up X. When you have a critical patient, like a critical heart attack patient, come into your ER and you are not equipped for that level of intervention, it sucks all the resources, it sucks all the air out. So this is making sure that you're getting those folks where they need to go, and you're freeing up those resources for the calls that they can handle.
So what was the most difficult sticking point on this bill? What did you have to overcome to pass it?
It was surprising. It was actually the folks with the trauma advisory boards themselves that worried that this was going to co-opt what they already do and take away the power to have that. And I think, we individually, we went to every single trauma advisory board meeting. I think we might have missed one, and Barrett went to that, my chief of staff. But I was tried to be there for all of them to explain this is the process. We're not trying to undercut the trauma system or change it. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of, I think, trepidation between private ambulance and public. Mm-hmm. What does this mean for the workforce? Is this favoring one over the other? Okay. And we actually had, I was so proud of those conversations because they both said, we actually need this to work together when we're working efficient. We know, there are places in rural Oregon that are never going to be, they're going to always have private ambulance. It's just a scale, an economy of scale issue. And then the hospitals, I had some really hard conversations with them. They anytime you talk about pulling data, because we want to create a data bank so that this all lives in a place where we can see what is working, what isn't. It's incredibly important to me with any legislation that we have measurable outcomes. That's something, not that I've been there very long, but the more I'm there, the more I see we really don't, as a body, tend to attach those measurable outcomes, and I think that is absolutely crucial. So like I said, it's kind of a small thing, but from in the big sense of things, it's really shifting how we think, and I think that's my job, is to look at those systems and see how can we do this better.
Okay. Tell us about a time in the past 2 years when you said no or stood up to a democratic interest that wanted you to vote a certain way. So we're looking for a sign of independence here.
Definitely the first version of the housing bill that came through. I had a lot of deep concerns about the UGB, and then even, and I can't remember the name, the small bill that looked at North Plains, where, you know, the majority of my caucus voted to say that no, this couldn't go on the ballot. I think that it is our job as legislators to make democracy easier and to make the access to that. I'm pretty proud of my reputation as being a fairly independent voice. I don't always agree with my caucus, but I also I tend to have those conversations more in private. I think airing our dirty laundry, you know, caucus time, when we have caucus meetings, that's like family therapy. That's the time we sit down and we work through it. But I think if you ask any of my colleagues, I have fiercely challenged some things that we have looked at.
Okay.
You know, a great example, I'm not on the transportation board, but I think we have a truly wicked problem with ODOT and funding, and not just ODOT, but all, as we move forward into a year that could be lean, we have a funding problem. It's going to take, no one wants to introduce taxes, nobody wants to talk about tolling, but if we, in the light of how the kicker works and how our current financial situation is, that money isn't just going to come from nowhere. I think we just need to have honest conversations about it, and they're hard.
Okay. Is there a bill that you would point to where you worked with a Republican colleague to get something done that was difficult?
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, the EMS bill didn't start off easy like that, but probably the greatest example in the last session, and I know you and I have talked about this, Nigel, is the PERS bill. So the PERS bill that created a new category that lowered the age for public safety. PERS is generally not a bipartisan thing. And when this bill came before the legislature previously, and I remember looking at that, and it failed. So we went back and said, what will it take to move this? Because clearly we need to move the needle on some of these things, from my perspective, clearly. And started having one-on-one conversations with legislators on both sides of the aisle, and I was really surprised. I asked folks, like, what do you need from this to make it workable? What makes sense in this? And everyone, I think people came away from that bill. I like to say equal opportunity pissed off everyone. Okay. So I said no to the unions on some things. I said no to my colleagues and no to the Republicans on some things. And we built this kind of, I don't want to say ramshackle coalition, because it was a pretty intense coalition of folks that don't normally work together. And that is actually one of my favorite things to do in the legislature. And my old committee, Emergency Management, General Government, I had a lot of opportunities to partner with my Republican colleagues. I absolutely treasure those. I don't think it doesn't mean you compromise your values, it's you find that common interest.
Which Republicans did you work with on the first bill? I forget.
Rick Lewis, Helfrich, Greg Smith, of course. I think I had great conversations with Rep. Conrad. He's now gone. Representative Mannix. Pretty much, with few exceptions, no one slammed the door on me. Okay. A few people did, but a lady never tells.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What if you're reelected? What are you going to make your highest priority next session?
So it's, I have my committee priority right now that seems to be kind of coming into view, and then my personal priority. From a committee stance, I'm chair of the newly minted labor and workplace standards, and in every hearing we've had, every meeting I've had, it's so clear that we are in a workforce crisis in this state. there's a million ideas about how to fix that, and the more that my staff and I have dug into this and peeled back the layers of the onion on it, the more like the very building blocks that we have aren't working. So first and foremost, you look at BOLI, and I'm not trying to throw BOLI under the bus, but you have an agency that's failing to meet what they're mandated to do. And I've had great conversations with Commissioner Stevenson on what can we do for this. But they have been historically disinvested in, not just for years, for decades, really. So we're not able to enforce wage theft laws that are on the book. We have all these, and I have been guilty of this, these great ideas for new apprenticeship programs, new worker programs, but we have nowhere to house and stand them up. And I think that as a whole, the legislature needs to take a beat and look in and find what systems are failing to provide that we've stood up for this. We have to make those work before we add the next pieces. I think some of that can happen simultaneously, but I'll tell you, that's not a very popular thing to say, especially to some of my partners, is, hey, hold up. These are good ideas. They're worthy of talking about. What does the foundation look like? Because if the foundation is crumbling, this isn't going to work. Likewise, personal policy.
So can I just slow you down for a second? So Democrats, with the exception of the 11 session, have controlled the House since 2007. They've controlled the Senate since 2003. They've controlled the governor's office since 76, whenever Atiya's second term was. So, Democrats are the party of labor. How come BOLI is so, they say they can't enforce, they made this kind of outrageous claim recently that if you make less than or more than $53,000 a year, they're not going to investigate your claim. I mean, that's disgraceful. So Democrats have had control for a long time.
Yeah.
So why haven't Democrats invested in this agency?
I think it's not just this agency. I think it's multiple places where Democrats take that function for granted. We have folks, another great area that we're looking into, take a look at the audits department at the Secretary of State office. We have 4 auditors. That is, when you look at comparable states of our size and our neighboring states for sure, that number pales in comparison.
We have more than 4 auditors.
We have 4 auditors. 4 independent Secretary of State auditors. So some of the bigger agencies have auditors embedded, like OHA and DHS, but those individual audit positions.
Are you sure about that? I think
now you're making me want to double check it. We are, and
all right,
it's a close number.
I'll stipulate that we have very few.
I could Google that right now, but it is very few,
So,
and that's the branch of government that we look to make sure we're doing the right thing.
So Lucas wrote a story last week that looked at licensing boards that, we keep hearing, we have a terrible shortage of people to work in mental health or social work or nursing or
EMS is one of them.
Anything. And I think 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 of the boards that you looked at don't have reciprocity.
We don't have EMS reciprocity in the state.
Right.
So why do you think that is?
So I just want to lead. So last legislative days, and I think both sides are probably going to kill me for saying this, we brought in private ambulance and public sector interests. So I had Oregon State Firefighters Council and private ambulance there and said, and I admittedly brought beers. I put a beer down in front of everybody and said, for the next hour, we're going to hash this out. Because what I found in that conversation, and this is just around EMS, that interstate compact, there's a lot of lobbying of, I don't want to say accusations, but a lot of preconceived and held notions that this is what this side wants. I wanted people at the table to have it out. Like, what is the common value? What is the problem with this? And while we certainly didn't solve it, we had a really productive discussion. It was the first time that those 2 groups had come together to talk about that. That is one of the pieces, we're looking at. Does the interstate compact in EMS, does it actually work? Because there's some thoughts that it actually doesn't do a whole lot regardless. So then I said, okay, well, what about looking at a regional interstate compact? What about, we have reciprocity with Washington and Idaho and California, especially in Idaho where our border states are. I think we can respect the level of professionalism and training that we expect of our medical professionals, but what we're doing right now isn't working. So my labor partners might be upset with me for that, but I think at the end of the day, we all want the best patient care and best outcome. And so that's some of what I bring, is the ability to bring people together and say, we're going to sit down and have this hard conversation. We're not going to skirt around the issue. Maybe it's because I am a New Yorker by birth, but there's a lot of, I abhor the passive aggressiveness that can sometimes happen. Let's get in, have the hard conversations, and do the work.
Why do you think that we have so, not just EMS, but all the boards that, and licensing agencies that Lucas looked at, same, everybody's got a different excuse, but it's all the same excuse. We don't want people to be able to come here and work. And you said this at the outset, that we have the workforce crisis.
We absolutely do.
It's a little bit hard for us on the outside to look at this, and yes, I believe you when you say we have a workforce crisis, but then when we look at all these licensing agencies, Oregon's a closed shop for the most part, across the board.
Yeah.
Whether it's being a lawyer, an acupuncturist, a psychologist, an EMS provider, it's kind of crazy.
I don't disagree with you. I think, and again, this kind of toes the line here, whether it's the party line, the labor line, there's no one size fits all to this. So this idea that if we just open up licensure, that's not magically going to work. You know, if you're a paramedic or a firefighter working in California, you're making a lot more money than you do in Oregon. There's no good reason why you would choose to leave that and come to a place with worse retirement benefits and lower pay. So it's not just one thing. We have to look at all sides of it, but it is a worthy thing to examine. I try to look at it, you know, because I've asked myself the same thing. Why is this such a big deal? To give kind of a little bit of grace to the folks that don't want that, they have very high standards. They're very territorial in the best of ways about the quality of care, the quality of the service that they're providing. And I think there's a real fear, especially, you know, EMS is not, for example, EMS is not standard. The standards of a paramedic working in, you know, Georgia or Alabama are entirely different than a paramedic working in Oregon or Washington. We innovate. We take people's airways. I mean, we literally take away their ability to breathe, and we better be damn good at that.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about bringing someone in that doesn't have that level of training, you know, rightly so, that scares people. I would challenge on the backside of that, then how do we bring people up to that level? How do we make this a place where people want to come work and provide that service?
Yeah. Okay. Questions?
It seems like what is your take on, obviously this was most prominent in Multnomah County, but seems to be a little bit of a trend in essentially reducing the amount of training of people that are in ambulances in an effort to kind of address these staffing problems that we're just talking about. Is that an innovative solution, or is that, you know, pushing the boundaries of safety?
I think this gets a little wonky from my perspective. I don't think that we need less training. I think our medical directors do a great job of saying, we're going to enroll in this new study, or we're going to introduce this new medication. It's how EMS has moved forward. But kind of like we talk about, and I want to go back to something at one point because I didn't get to talk about my personal priority. But we need to look at simplification of our mission and making sure that, again, we're getting people trained. You can actually dilute the mission. We have so many incredible paramedics working in this state, and there's a variety of skill levels out there for sure. So I don't know quite what you're saying about lowering the level of training.
Well, no, I just mean like if we're switching from a paramedic to an EMT, the EMT obviously has less training than the paramedic, so the total amount of training in the car would be lower.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So the one medic, one EMT staffing, I don't agree with the way it played out necessarily, but I am in strong agreement that one EMT, it's what I've worked under for the last 11, 12 years, one paramedic, one EMT staffing. Where I work, every single fire engine has a paramedic on board. So in the event of a very high acuity call, say it's me, that paramedic, I jump onto that ambulance and I become the paramedic in charge. or, I have that discussion with the ambulance paramedic. Our EMT is able to drive, or they're able to be in the back and a firefighter drives. It's a system that we're able to work to serve the most people. Paramedics like to, we call ourselves, people call us paramagics for a reason. What we do is pretty incredible, highly skilled work, but a lot of, our bread and butter calls, I think most of our calls are capable, or an EMT can handle that. What you're getting with a paramedic is the discretion to say, this patient's sick, this patient's not sick, but it is more important to have ambulances with people available to treat and transport patients than to have some purity test of who's on that ambulance, quite frankly.
Okay, so what is your next step for solutions? But obviously we're lacking,
Well, that's what happened in Multnomah County. That is very much a Multnomah County.
Yeah, no, I'm saying around the state. Like, what do you think? What is our next step to kind of solve that?
So I think what we're doing, we're looking at how the systems work and making sure that we're taking those available people in ambulances and utilizing them in the best way possible. I do think there's a workforce and a recruitment issue. Whether it's COVID or something else, nobody wants to be a paramedic or even really a firefighter anymore. We're having a really hard time recruiting. This is like the most basic thing, and maybe it's because I taught kindergarten for a couple of years, many decades ago. We need to be in high schools, we need to be recruiting folks and showing them that this is a really viable trade, much like being an electrician or being a plumber, and giving folks the tools for that. I came into this as an EMT before I was a firefighter. I did it because I wanted to be a rock climbing ranger and do cool stuff. I had no vision of working on an ambulance or even being a firefighter. So giving people that alternate pathway, I think apprenticeships are awesome. I also think, again, we have to fix the issue of who pays for it, where does it live? The bully questions that we have in this state, and this is going to be another wicked problem that I think I'm excited to look at. We have registered apprenticeships, which are highly technical. There's a ton of oversight, there's a ton of parameters on them, and then we have little A apprenticeships, which are things that came through Future Ready Oregon. Some of them have been really successful, some of them have not. I don't know that we know those numbers or what's happening, but there's not a lot of oversight there. A lot of those live within the HEC, and I'm not firing shots at the HEC here, but there's what I can see from the outside as someone looking at that, there's not a lot of crosshatch communication happening, and I think that needs to change.
You're going to come back to your personal
Yes, so personal, I like to dive into kind of wonky policy. My office, we are working on a good governance package to help state agencies perform better. And we've been in meetings all summer with the executive branch, with folks from DAS. I recently met with some of our labor partners, looking at essentially you have, and I'm guilty of this as well, you have 90 legislators that come in, and our benchmark of success is how much we can pass. And so you have everybody driving their idea bus, dumping these ideas off, and then zooming out to do the next round. Mm-hmm. And we don't really have the follow through. We have the KPMs, the key performance measures, which I would challenge when you really look at those, they're not giving us measurable outcomes. Mm-hmm. We need outcomes on what we're passing. We need to slow down a little bit and make sure that things are working. And we need to while we're holding state agencies accountable, because it's so important that we do that. Clearly we haven't done a great job at that. We need to find where the holes are and how we make them successful. Whether that's upping the customer service function, whether that's I was kind of shocked. The more I got into the Secretary of State Audits Division, they're under-resourced. We don't have those audits, to me, seem driven by whatever the issue of the day is, rather than a risk matrix, rather than what do we really need to be diving into. So not really sexy work, but I think really vital, essential work that we have to, and I'm hoping bipartisan work.
Okay. But are you telling us that you're going to pass a bill because we're passing too many bills? The answer to too many bills is another bill?
Wow. No one's put it to me like that. Yes, Nigel, yes I am.
Okay.
I am. But it's more a look at...
That's like first place in the pie eating contest is more pie.
There you go.
right.
Love it. More pie. You know what? That's really what it boils down to. I want more pie for everyone, and I want the pie to actually serve the community. Like if people want a cherry pie, well, let's give them a
Okay.
cherry pie, not an
No,
apple.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Thank you.
So in seriousness, what would that look like? So other people have observed that you're just pounding, and we just talked about it with Bowley. We keep pounding new
Yeah.
mandates on top of them without any funding. So how do you? What's your proposal?
Well, I don't want to get in, like, we're still trying. We had specifics, we shopped them around,
Okay.
and people said, this is realistic, this isn't. So
Uh-huh.
we're trying to dial that in and narrow that down. You know, there is a huge gap in customer service in a lot of these things. We've seen when COVID hit with the employment department, you know, with Bowley.
Yeah.
Do we look at, I tend to look at things, no surprise, through a firefighter lens. Like
Yeah.
what, do we have a strike team of customer service folks? How do we, you know, that's a low wage job within the state. How do we make that more attractive? How do we get our union partners to go in on recruiting and moving people through that? Do we give them, you know, what does that look like? There's also the quagmire of hiring in state agencies where you might work as a temp somewhere and then you're kicked back out, and then to get back into the system is really cumbersome. So these are small things, but I think they could have really, really long-term impact. There's, you know, the other thing that's important to me is that we take a look at pass-through funding. We have all this money coming out of the legislature. All those agencies like nonprofits, CBOs, they have to report that federally, but there's nowhere for, if you're curious and you say X amount of money went to the Happy Housing Project,
Uh-huh.
you can't see where that went. They make a federal report, so let's find a way to streamline that, and it would be requiring a little more work for that group
Yeah.
to say, this was the outcome, this is where the money meant, and I think
Okay.
we should be writing deliverables into our legislation as legislators. I think we should have metrics for what is successful and the ability to go in and change that if it's not. And I mean, we have, and this is again unpopular opinion, we pass things in legislation that are now mandated in agencies that people haven't looked at in 10 or 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that program is no longer serving the community that it's
Yeah.
intended to, but it's staffed. I mean, you have to look at what is actually serving people and what's working. I think there's a lot of bloat there. And I think there's a way to take some of the resources we have, shift them, and make them more efficient. That's a terrifying thing to say for folks. I mean,
Yeah.
when we've talked to people, they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
And I'm sure my caucus wouldn't agree with me. We need bill limits. What we need to avoid is then somebody saying, I'm going to take my 15 bills and roll them into an omnibus. But we have to look at legislators as legislators, and this is, and I have been guilty of this, that success isn't what you pass,
Yeah.
it's the change that it makes.
Okay. We are out of time, and it's a deadline day, and we have 2 more of these to do today. So let us
Great.
end by asking you a question we're asking all candidates. I'm sure you already know what it is.
Is this the one about high school?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I figured
Here's
you
the
knew
thing,
what it
I
was.
don't have a quick answer for you. I was a
Okay.
lot of things. I was.
Well, pick one. Let's
So-
pretend that we're in an elevator together. We're only going up 1 floor. And
Well, I
you
would
only have just a
show you
little bit of
my
time.
big muscles and then
Okay.
say I'm also the editor of the literary magazine.
Okay,
So I was super nerdy, athletic, and a little bit counterculture.
Okay, so best, and which of those would your classmates who remember you now say you were best known for?
Probably being a nerd.
Well, how did you communicate that nerdiness?
I was very artistic. I was very into writing. Like I said, I was the editor of the literary magazine. I was most likely to be the one standing outside with a no war sign.
All right. Great, thank you for indulging our questions.
Yeah, thank you. I wish I had a simple answer.
It's all right, there are no
I
simple
definitely
answers in
wasn't
this life.
I wasn't prom queen.
All right.